I wore a dress made literally out of garbage to the most prestigious gala of the year. And the look on my mother-in-law's face when the silk she was praising turned out to be discarded industrial plastic was worth every single second of the humiliation I'd endured for years. I stood there, under the shimmering chandeliers of the Grand Heights Ballroom, watching the literal elite of the city recoil in a mix of horror and fascination as I revealed that my couture gown was actually a collection of high-end trash I'd spent 3 months salvaging from their own backyard dumpsters. Was I wrong for turning the most important night of their social calendar into a literal dumpster fire? Or would you have done the exact same thing if you were pushed to the edge by people who treated you like you were disposable? I need you to tell me if I crossed the line, because right now, looking at the wreckage of my marriage and the absolute chaos I left behind, I've never felt more alive. To understand why I showed up to a black tie event smelling faintly of chemical cleaner and wearing a bodice made of melted bubble wrap, you have to understand the hell that was my life for the last 3 years. I married into the Sterling family, a name that carries so much weight in this city that people practically bow when they hear it. My husband, Julian, was everything a girl was supposed to want. Handsome, successful, and heir to a real estate empire. But Julian came with a catch: his mother, Eleanor. From the day we met, Eleanor made it her life's mission to remind me that I was scavenged from a world she didn't recognize. I wasn't from old money. I was a scholarship kid who worked 2 jobs to get a design degree. To her, I wasn't a daughter-in-law. I was a stain on their pristine upholstery. She spent every family dinner, every holiday, and every quiet moment subtly chipping away at my self-worth, making comments about my quaint upbringing and my affordable taste in clothes. Julian, bless his heart, was a coward. He'd hold my hand under the table while his mother tore me apart, but he'd never actually open his mouth to stop her. It reached a breaking point 3 months ago during the planning for the Sterling Foundation Gala. This wasn't just a party, it was the event of the decade. Eleanor told me, in front of the entire planning committee, that I wasn't allowed to wear anything from my own fledgling design line. She said, and I quote, "We can't have you looking like you're wearing rags in front of the governor, dear. I've already picked out a dress for you from a real designer." When the dress arrived, it wasn't a gift. It was a joke. It was a dull, shapeless gray shift that looked like something a Victorian orphan would wear to a funeral. She wanted me to be invisible. She wanted me to be the trash she always thought I was. That was the moment something inside me just snapped. I decided right then that if she wanted me to represent the lower class, I would do it so perfectly that she'd never be able to show her face in public again. I began my project that night. I didn't go to a fabric store. I went to the loading docks. I went to the recycling centers behind the boutiques Eleanor frequented. I started collecting things that people throw away without a second thought: iridescent plastic film, discarded copper wiring, industrial mesh, and thousands of those tiny plastic bread tags. I spent my nights in my basement studio, hidden away from Julian, meticulously cleaning and transforming this literal filth into something unrecognizable. I used heat guns to melt plastic into scales that looked like expensive sequins. I wove the copper wire into a corset that shimmered like rose gold. I spent hundreds of hours hand-stitching discarded silk scraps I found in the scrap bins of high-end tailors. I was building a masterpiece out of the things the Sterlings of the world deemed worthless, just like they deemed me. Every night, while Julian was out at networking dinners or late-night meetings that I knew were just excuses to avoid the cold atmosphere at home, I was in that basement, bleeding for my art. My fingertips were raw from twisting the copper wire into a delicate filigree that mimicked expensive lace. I remember one night specifically, about a month into the process, when I was trying to figure out how to make the skirt have that heavy, luxurious weight that only high-end velvet usually has. I found myself behind a 5-star hotel at 2 a.m., pulling out heavy-duty plastic liners from their laundry delivery bins. To anyone else, it was industrial waste. To me, it was the perfect medium to create a pleated texture that would catch the gala lights like liquid mercury. The irony wasn't lost on me. I was literally diving into the excess of the 1% to create a mirror to hold up to their faces. I felt like a spy in my own home. I had to hide my fabric in old suitcases and pretend I was just working on boring sketches for my portfolio. Once, Eleanor burst into my studio without knocking. She never knocked, and looked around with a pinched nose. asking why the room smelled like a burnt laboratory. I just smiled and told her I was experimenting with new synthetic polymers. She laughed in that condescending, tinkling way of hers and said, "Don't bother, dear. Science was never your suit, and neither is high fashion." Every time Eleanor made a snide remark at lunch about my simple tastes, I would just think about the sheer complexity of the garbage I was wearing. She had no idea that her insults were being woven directly into my design. The psychological toll of living a double life was massive. I had to play the part of the dutiful, quiet wife during the day, attending boring tea parties and nodding along to conversations about charity auctions that only existed to lower the attendees' tax brackets. I watched Julian become more and more like his mother, colder, more obsessed with the family image, and less interested in the woman he had actually married. One night, he came into the basement while I was hiding a massive roll of discarded copper mesh. He didn't even ask what I was doing. He just complained about the wine selection for the gala and left. That was when I knew our marriage was already dead. I wasn't a person to him anymore. I was just a placeholder in his social standing. So that is the situation I was in, and I had to make a choice. I was either going to go to that gala as the quiet, obedient little wife in the gray rag, or I was going to burn the whole social hierarchy down with a dress made of garbage. Before I tell you what happened when I actually walked into that ballroom, and the truth came out, I want you to pause and comment below what you would have done in my shoes. Would you have played it safe to keep the peace? Or would you have gone for the ultimate revenge? The night of the gala arrived, and the atmosphere in our house was electric. Eleanor was already at the venue, presiding over her kingdom. Julian was waiting for me at the bottom of the stairs, looking dapper in a custom tuxedo. When I finally stepped out of my room, I wasn't wearing the gray shift. I was wearing the trash queen gown. Just focus on not tripping in the dress I bought you. That comment fueled me for another 48 hours straight. I started incorporating even smaller details. The pearls on the neckline were actually smoothed down pieces of white PVC piping, and the internal structure of the gown was reinforced with the flexible plastic straps from shipping crates. I was creating a structural marvel out of the very items that would have ended up in a landfill, much like how Eleanor wanted to bury my career and my personality. I would spend hours soaking the scavenged items in industrial-grade disinfectant in a hidden tub, scrubbing away the grime of the city until they sparkled with a synthetic brilliance. There was a strange poetry in it, cleaning the world's discarded bits to dress a woman who felt just as discarded by her own family. I recall finding a stash of iridescent bubble wrap that had protected a shipment of Italian marble for Eleanor's new sunroom. When I hit it with a low-heat blow-dryer, it crinkled into a texture that looked exactly like raw silk shantung. I spent 6 nights straight hand-sewing those bubbles onto a discarded mesh backing, creating a bodice that shifted colors from pearlescent white to a deep, toxic green as I moved. I was exhausted. My back ached from hunching over the sewing machine, and my lungs burned from the fumes of the various adhesives, but the vision was becoming real. I wasn't just making a dress. I was building a monument to my own resilience. I even started sneaking into the Sterling family office at night to raid their high-end shredding bins. I found thousands of long, thin strips of silver security paper from their old contracts. I wove those strips into a dramatic, architectural collar that looked like a silver crown turned upside down. It was a literal representation of the paperwork and the wealth that they used to keep people like me in their place. It was breathtaking. It was a floor-length mermaid silhouette that transitioned from a deep, metallic copper at the waist to a shimmering, translucent silver at the hem. Under the dim lights of our foyer, it looked like I had been dipped in liquid moonlight. Julian's jaw literally hit the floor. He didn't ask what it was made of, he just stared. "You look incredible," he whispered. "Is this a Dior?" I just smiled and told him it was a custom piece. He was so proud to have me on his arm as we pulled up to the gala. The ride to the venue was the longest 30 minutes of my life. I could feel the weight of the plastic and wire pressing against my skin, a constant reminder of the months of secrecy and pain. Julian kept talking about the donors we needed to impress, completely oblivious to the fact that his wife was wearing a literal landfill. When we pulled up to the red carpet, the flashbulbs were blinding. I saw Eleanor standing near the entrance, draped in real emeralds and heavy silk, looking like a queen from a bygone era. She saw us approaching and her eyes widened. I could see the gears turning in her head. She was furious I wasn't in the gray dress, but she was stunned by how radiant I looked. When we entered the ballroom, the room went silent. It was one of those movie moments. People were whispering, pointing, and coming up to touch the fabric. Eleanor rushed over, her eyes wide with a mix of fury that I'd disobeyed her and greed, because she thought I had somehow scored a dress that would make her look good by association. She reached out and stroked the sleeve, which was actually made of hundreds of heat-treated milk jugs, and exclaimed, "The texture! It's so avant-garde. Julian, who is the designer? We must tell the press immediately." The local fashion reporters were circling us like sharks. This was it. This was the climax of 3 years of being treated like dirt. I felt a surge of adrenaline so powerful it made my hands shake. I saw the city's most famous socialite, Mrs. Vanderwall, leaning in to inspect the crystals on my skirt. "It's so unique," she purred. "It has such a gritty modern energy." I almost choked on my own laughter. Gritty was certainly one way to put it. I waited until the governor and his wife were standing right next to us. I waited until the head of the city's largest fashion magazine had her recorder out. I looked Eleanor dead in the eye, gave her my brightest, most obedient smile, and spoke loudly enough for the entire circle to hear. "Oh, Eleanor, you don't need a designer's name. This dress is a tribute to the Sterling legacy. It's made entirely of the things your family throws away." The confusion on her face was priceless. I continued, pointing to my bodice. "This rose gold is actually discarded copper wiring from your new construction project. These sequins are recycled plastic from the catering company you fired last month. And the train? That's industrial mesh from the demolition site Julian managed." I didn't stop there. I reached into the hidden pocket of my skirt and pulled out a small, laminated tag. "And this, Governor, is the serial number from the dumpster behind the Sterling Plaza, where I found the base material for this skirt. I thought it was important to represent the true foundation of the Sterling wealth. The stuff they think is too dirty to look at." The silence that followed was deafening. It was as if the air had been sucked out of the room. I could see the sweat starting to bead on Julian's forehead as he realized the magnitude of the social suicide I was committing. Eleanor's hand was still hovering near my sleeve, her fingers trembling. The governor's wife actually let out a small, muffled gasp, not of disgust, but of genuine shock at the audacity. I felt like a conductor leading a symphony of chaos. I leaned in closer to Eleanor, my voice dripping with the same saccharine sweetness she'd used on me for years. "Don't worry, Eleanor. I made sure to wash the filth off. It's a lot cleaner now than the way you talk about my family behind their backs." The reporters were having a field day. The flashes were so frequent it felt like a strobe light. Mrs. Vanderwall, surprisingly, started to clap. "It's genius," she whispered, her voice carrying across the silent circle. "It's the most honest piece of art I've seen in this ballroom in 20 years. That was the final nail in the coffin. Eleanor couldn't handle the fact that her peers might actually find my trash revolutionary. She looked down at her own $1 million silk gown, then at my shimmering plastic scales, and her eyes glazed over. She tried to say something, some cutting remark to put me back in my place, but only a small, strangled sound came out. She clutched her chest, the medical episode beginning, and the Sterling family bodyguards had to rush in to keep her from collapsing onto the floor. The irony of her falling onto a floor she'd bragged about being imported from Italy was the cherry on top. Julian tried to grab my arm, his face a mask of pure rage. "You've destroyed everything," he hissed. "Do you have any idea what this does to our stock price? To our reputation?" I just looked at him, really looked at him for the first time in months, and felt absolutely nothing. "The reputation was a lie, Julian. Just like this dress. You just happen to prefer the lies that cost more money." The aftermath was a total collapse. Eleanor was rushed to the hospital, though the doctors later confirmed she was just suffering from extreme social distress. The gala, the one she had spent a year planning, became a joke. The headlines the next morning didn't talk about the Sterling Foundation's charity work. They talked about the garbage goddess, who exposed the hypocrisy of the elite. One tabloid even ran a side-by-side photo of my dress and a photo of a literal trash heap, with the caption, "Who wore it better?" The humiliation was complete. Julian gave me an ultimatum that night. Apologize to his mother and publicly say it was a performance art piece that went too far, or we were done. He actually expected me to crawl back and beg for forgiveness after I'd finally tasted freedom. He said I was ungrateful for the life he'd given me. I looked around our marble-floored penthouse and realized that everything in it felt like the trash I'd used for the dress. Shiny on the outside, but empty and discarded on the inside. I didn't even pack my bags. I just walked out with my trash dress and my dignity. I left my wedding ring on the kitchen counter next to a pile of unpaid recycling bills. For the first few weeks, I lived in a cheap motel, terrified and exhilarated all at once. My phone wouldn't stop ringing. Lawyers from the Sterling estate were threatening me with reputational damage lawsuits, but my own social media was blowing up. People loved the story. They loved the scavenger bride, who took down the real estate giants. I started receiving messages from young designers all over the world who were inspired by the trash queen gown. I realized then that Eleanor's attempt to bury me had only given me the perfect soil to grow in. I'm currently staying in a small studio apartment, and guess what? My trash dress went viral. I've had 3 major sustainable fashion brands reach out for collaborations. I've been invited to speak at a conference on environmental design, and a local museum wants to display the gown as a permanent installation. I lost a husband, sure, but I never really had him to begin with. I married a man who was just another piece of the Sterling furniture. I gained my voice back. I learned that when people try to treat you like garbage, you don't have to take it. You can take that garbage and build a throne out of it. I spend my days now working on a new collection. This time made from ethically sourced materials, but the spirit is the same. I'm no longer the scholarship kid or the trashy daughter-in-law. I'm the woman who took the elite's own waste and turned it into a mirror they couldn't stand to look at. Julian tried to call me last week, sounding small and defeated. He told me his mother hasn't left the house in a month, and that the family is being mocked at every country club in the state. He asked if we could talk it out. I just told him to check the recycling bin outside his office. I might have left my answer there. It's been a wild ride, and looking back, I don't regret a single second of that night. It wasn't just about a dress. It was about showing everyone that you can't define someone's value based on where they came from or what they have in their bank account. Every time I see a news clip of Eleanor trying to avoid the paparazzi, I feel a little spark of joy. She tried to make me invisible, but I made myself unforgettable. I am now working on a second piece, one made entirely of the legal threats and cease and desist letters the Sterling lawyers have sent me. It's going to be a stunning, jagged cape that I plan to wear to the opening of my first solo exhibit. They keep trying to throw things at me, and I just keep turning them into something beautiful. The moral of the story is pretty simple. Never underestimate someone who has nothing to lose and a point to prove. If you're being treated like you don't belong, don't try to fit in. Stand out so brightly that they can't look away, even if you have to use their own ways to do it. Like this video if you were on my side and think Eleanor got exactly what she deserved. If you think I was too petty and should have just divorced Julian quietly, tell me why in the comments. Subscribe for more stories like this, and share your final thoughts on this whole mess in the comments section below. I'll see you all in the next story.